And let us start with a brief introduction on authentication, and more specifically authentication in the Blazor WebAssembly application, and what we need to watch out for. Like I explained in the introduction, I think it's a given that we'll need to have our users log into the application before they can do anything with it. The process of signing in is one thing, but since Blazor WASM applications are in fact client-side applications, some other measures will need to be put in place as well. We'll start with setting up the authentication part. That means we need to verify that the user is really who they say they are. Once we have been able to verify that, we'll then proceed with the authorization. The authorization part will allow us to check if the user has the permission to do what they are trying to do in the application, for example, navigating to a certain page. Based on the permissions, we can, for example, also hide certain menu items. Now, for my application, we are already interacting with our API, and those API calls we will also need to take a look at. At this point, our API endpoints are fully open. No checks are being done on it. That will need to change too. We'll need to verify, based on the token, if the incoming request is allowed or not, and expose data only if we're sure it is. I want to emphasize here again that when building and securing Blazor applications, we will need to pay close attention. We already know that everything runs client-side, and by default, everything that is available to the client, we need to assume that it can be, modified. We can thus only use authorization in the Blazor application to toggle UI options, like hiding a button. Users may bypass checks, and thus we need to ensure that everything users are trying to send to or request from the backend is validated there on the server. That's the only place where we have the ability to prevent exposing data that the user isn't allowed to see or modify. Adding authentication to Blazor takes some work, but the good news is that there are a few major blocks that we already get for free, and they will make the work a lot easier. And safer too, since we want to avoid having to roll our own security mechanisms. For starters, we will in our Blazor WebAssembly application rely heavily on a NuGet package called Microsoft ASP.NET Core Components WebAssembly Authentication. We'll see this package being used in the demos. It'll help us a lot with authentication via OIDC, which stands for OpenID Connect. Next, we will get a lot of help from the Authentication State Provider service. As the name implies, this will be used to know within the application what is the state of authentication. It's in fact used by built-in components we'll look at later to know, indeed, the authentication state. And it includes the Authorize You component. We will also use the cascading authentication state. A cascading parameter is defined on a higher level and will automatically be available for all nested components. It's indeed cascading through the entire hierarchy, and every component can use it. The cascading authentication state is a parameter we get for free, and when we put it at the highest level in our application, so in the app Blazor, all components can use it to know about the authentication state of the application. We'll use it in our own code to make decisions based on the authentication state. Blazor defaults to authentication based on OIDC, which stands for OpenID Connect. The NuGet package, so the Microsoft ASP.NET Core Components WebAssembly Authentication package, adds support for this. It also provides a set of primitives for authentication against ASP.NET Core backends, and it integrates ASP.NET Core Identity with API authorization support built on top of the Wednesday Identity Server. We won't be using Identity Server in this course though, but luckily it also works with other third-party identity providers which support OIDC. We will use, as already mentioned, Auth0 in the next part of this module. Once we have the building blocks for authentication in place, we can look at the built-in features that Blazor comes with in the authorization department. The Authorize You is a built-in component that allows us to either show or hide content in the UI based on whether the user that is viewing it actually is authorized to do so. So this is a UI thing really. We can use it, for example, to hide the admin menu option in an application if the user isn't in the admin role. Next is the Authorize attribute, which you may know from other ASP.NET Core technologies like MVC, and it does indeed the same. In a Razor component, we can add the Authorize attribute, and if the user isn't authorized to view the component, they will be redirected to the login flow. Just like in ASP.NET Core, for example, Authorize attribute can be combined with a list of roles to have more fine-grained control over which roles are required in order to work with the component. One disclaimer is in place here. The process of securing an application correctly can be quite a task. I've therefore gone for one practical solution to be able to secure the application, but many other options exist. It is definitely not the goal of this course to cover all options. I have a few dedicated courses on authentication in the Blazor part here that go a lot further in this topic. Take a look at these if you want to learn a lot more about this.